Hey, everybody. Thanks so much for joining me. If you're here for the first time, my name is Shemane, and today is Moldy Monday. Not really, but Keely Severson, one of my guests today, came up with the idea, why don't we make a Moldy Monday? So joining Keely and I is an incredible guy that I can't wait for you to meet. He's got an incredible story, and he is one of the original prototypes for chronic fatigue syndrome. Eric Johnson, thank you so much for being here.
Great, glad to be here.
So, Eric, tell us a little bit about your story briefly, and also we may get some questions coming in. We're broadcasting live right now, streaming live on Facebook, YouTube, and also on Twitter or Periscope. So I love seeing where people are watching from. So please make sure that you write your comments in the comment section and also let us know where you're watching from. But Eric, tell us a little bit about how you became known as the original prototype for chronic fatigue syndrome.
Well, back in 1985, a mystery illness descended upon a little town at the north end of Lake Tahoe in Nevada, Incline Village. This flu-like illness struck down hundreds of people and attracted the Center of Disease Control's attention, who sent a couple of CDC epidemiologists out to try to figure out what was going on. And the flu was really, it was a bad one, no doubt about it. But what emerged immediately as a clue was that the clusters of illness were all in moldy buildings. In fact, if you weren't in a moldy building, you were almost guaranteed to recover from this flu. So the Center for Disease Control and the researchers became completely fixated on the virus, and lacking any suitable explanation, they initiated all kinds of viral studies and convinced the world that the virus was the sole cause of chronic fatigue syndrome and completely overlooked the role of moldy buildings.
Keely, you have introduced me to Eric, so thank you so much for doing that. I'm so glad to have you both on here. What has your experience been with chronic fatigue syndrome, and how was it that you and Eric got connected?
Eric and I got connected through me doing mold outreach. When I realized that I was sick and mold was the cause, I started producing educational content. It got shared around a few of the mold groups, and at one point Eric had shared a video, and that's how him and I had made contact. We've just been getting to know each other for the past year around the medical history around chronic fatigue syndrome and Stachybotrys being present but not looked into. I absolutely had unremitting fatigue, but because I didn't understand the connection to a water damaged building and fatigue, I honestly judged myself as being lazy or something wrong with me. Like, I didn't understand that it was a health symptom. I just thought, wow, what's wrong with me that I don't have the energy to participate in my life that I feel like I should?
Eric, you and I have gone back and forth a little bit on email. It's the first time I've had a chance to speak with you. I'm so excited because as a pioneer in this, you had to break the mold, so to speak, and really, become bold and brave and speak out about this. What is the correlation between chronic fatigue syndrome and mold illness, do you think?
Well, as I was saying, with the Center for Disease Control and all researchers being completely baffled, they developed this research instrument. And that's exactly what chronic fatigue syndrome really is. It's not supposed to be thought of as the name of a bug or the name of a disease. It's really a research tool. And when I was asked to serve as a prototype, as a matrix, a basic starting point for this new syndrome, I could see how researchers were completely fixated on viruses. And I thought by volunteering to participate in this program, I could tell researchers what they had overlooked and help solve the mystery by factoring in the role of biotoxins in this chronic malady. Really amazing thing about this entire journey is the reluctance of researchers to reconsider the evidence. Once they had made up their mind that chronic fatigue syndrome was a virus, even though the role of the sick buildings was fully documented, they refused to reconsider it. So as you say, I had to get rather bold about challenging on them on their oversight and asking them why they refused to take all of the evidence into consideration.
And why was that?
I think part of it is their ego. Once they made up their mind, they don't like to be challenged. They don't want to reconsider. They don't want to admit that they made a mistake. And added to this is the economic consequence of bringing out such a horrible fact about so many sick buildings. The insurance companies are going to have a very vested interest in keeping a lid on this thing.
Yeah, Jam 1776 watching on Periscope said, I've gotten sick from mold, lost against my landlord. There was water damage that they just painted over. How many times, Keely, do you hear about this happening? They just paint over mold.
I hear it a lot from renters, unfortunately, and I've never heard a story of a landlord having integrity in fixing a moldy or water damaged building.
Well, why do you think that is? I mean, you talked about money, Eric, but and the CDC covering up the issue about chronic fatigue syndrome. How do we get around this? How do we bring this problem to the forefront and get doctors to admit that chronic fatigue and mold are related? And what can we do about it?
Well, I think by exposing this subject, it will embarrass them a little bit, perhaps force them to reconsider that they ought to look into this, especially since so many people are sick now. So raising awareness is the best thing we could possibly do.
Yeah, Jam 1776 says you're right, Keely. It's all about the money. And you had a recent, I don't want to say relapse, but what just happened to you, Keely? Do you mind sharing about that?
I just moved into a house that's new to us. It's less than 20 years old. It's very well built, no signs of water damage. However, I was having this really strange reaction that I identify as a mold reaction because I know what my mold symptoms are and I know when I'm close to it. The reaction was very specific to when I was in my kitchen, and it was much worse when I was cooking with my stovetop range. I got very confused and thought that I was somehow reacting to this electrical appliance. But what I found yesterday was a cabinet to the immediate right side of that electric flat top range that had hidden mold in it, no growth, no odor, but it was enough to somehow be amplified by the use of my stove. And the mold amplification theory is really at the core of Eric's, like the deepest part of his theory. And it's something that a lot of mold researchers and doctors are kind of missing because they really focus on like the particulates and the particles and not necessarily the amplification side of things, which might not be well researched or well understood.
Eric, tell us about that, the mold amplification.
Well, I have a rather unusual background being in nuclear missiles in the military. And this is actually where I got my major mold exposure, was in a moldy bunker where my unit was stationed. And when I combined how this mold was behaving, it seemed very much like the radioactive dust that we were trained to deal with as part of my specialty. In the first peer-reviewed article on trichothecene mycotoxins entered into the medical literature in 1986, Dr. William Croft noticed that the effects of this particular mold, Stachybotrys, were radiomimetic. somehow strangely akin to how radiation poisoning acts. And that's exactly how the amplification works. It's not just, it's obviously not a mere allergy. And even as a toxicity, this doesn't seem to address the facts. There seems to be more of an almost radioactive or electric charge that amplifies this toxin, making it more bioavailable, so that in the presence of electromagnetic fields, this toxicity feels worse than any normal conventional chemical ought to.
You know, it's incredible to me that the pieces of the puzzle are just now coming together for me after almost 20 years of immersing myself in all things toxic mold and trying to speak out about it, because if it could happen to us, it could happen to you, Eric, and you, Keely, and again, people don't realize how devastating this issue is. And what you're talking about, Eric, how it can be amplified by just being close to electronics. That's probably what happened to you, Keely. Eric, what were some of your symptoms?
Well, as a prototype for chronic fatigue syndrome, I had everything in the book. The neurocognitive dysfunction, the fatigue, but the most important part, because it stands out, is the failure of immunity. It's the loss of the ability of the immune system to keep normal viruses in restraint. So things like Epstein-Barr virus or HHV6 or cytomegalovirus would come leaping out and be very confusing to doctors, because they wouldn't understand why somebody was sick with the viral illness far beyond what they would normally expect from that kind of virus.
And Keely, you are very well versed in using herbs. What you talked about your mold illness being exacerbated by this new situation. What do you recommend? And I know it's going to be different for people, but what is a general way that people can get well when they've had exposure to mold? Or even, are you ready to talk about 5G and things like that?
Well, I really don't know anything about 5G, if I'm being honest, but I think, look, I don't care what drugs, what herbs, what I would have had in my house yesterday. I needed to get that cabinet out to feel better. So I will always side with Eric on mold avoidance, or avoiding the poison is the number one cure. I do have things in my herbal repertoire that I think help me get over a hit faster.
Okay.
And those things vary depending on what I'm struggling with. Like, did my kidneys take a hit? Do I need to clear those out? So that's not a one size fits all.
So how do you know if your kidneys got hit?
So me personally, if I have kidney or bladder symptoms, and when I screen my patient base for kidney and bladder symptoms, so any symptoms of kidney failure, water retention, swelling of the limbs, itchiness down the limbs, or any symptoms of bladder dysfunction, frequent urination, unable to void the bladder, feeling like there's burning, symptoms of interstitial cystitis, these would all be symptoms that would make me wonder if the kidneys were being affected by toxins and ultimately affecting the bladder. But when I was getting hit by the stove and the hidden mold, it was mostly a feeling of fire and a feeling of panic. So I would say emotional distress.
Eric, I'm going to throw this question at you from Rose. Does mold dry out, die off after a roof is replaced? So let's say you have a leaky roof and they replace the roof. What can you expect to see and feel afterwards?
Well, conventional lesser molds do tend to die off, and they denature just by putting a fan on it, allowing a little bit of time. And the toxic value doesn't seem to linger very long, but not so for things like Stachybotrys.
Yeah.
The trichothecene producers, such as Chetomium, Fusarium, Stachybotrys, they seem to be a slightly different animal, in that even if the mold is completely dried out, has been dead for years, it is equally toxic. The toxins are very stable and can last for up to 5 years that we know of.
What were some of the things that you experienced? Like, how did you come to the realization that Stachybotrys or mold illness was similar to what people are going through with chemo.
Well, the research on Stachybotrys indicates that it's a powerful protein synthesis inhibitor that shuts off immune function at such a fundamental level that it's like having cancer. It's like having chemically induced AIDS. You have no immune function. Your natural killer cells are not working. Your T cells are confused. Your B cells are going wild. And this can result in so many different manifestations of illness that if somebody looks for a specific pattern and expects that to be the representative of toxic mold exposure, it's not going to correlate, because once your immune system is shut off, this can result in just about anything.
Yeah, that's what I've been telling people before, is that it affects everybody differently, and it could show up as something different, a different illness, from headaches to migraines to flu-like symptoms. Eric, do you think that there's anything? How can we tie this into the current situation with the virus that we're experiencing right now? And how could that be similar to mold illness?
Well, the flu that hit us back in 1985 appeared to come, believe it or not, from China. It was never investigated. It was reported that a marathon runner from China brought this virus back to our little village and touched off this infectious epidemic. And from that point on, the Center for Disease Control and chronic fatigue syndrome researchers themselves completely dropped the ball. But when I look at the current situation and see how the moldy buildings enabled a long-term outcome of chronic illness resulting from the combination of Stachybotrys exposure plus this, we called it a China flu. We really did.
You did, even back then?
Yes, we did. And I see that we have the same situation now with long COVID, where some people breeze on through this COVID-19 without apparent ill effects, and other people are plunged into chronic illness.
Yeah.
So I can't help but wonder if toxic mold is playing the same hidden role now as it did back then.
Keely, I've got a question for you from Ellen Eisner. She gets hives and dry, itchy skin. What can you do for that as an herbalist?
So we would look at what the liver's doing and possibly helping the liver function better. Hives often are toxic heat accumulation inside the body that the body can't filter out. So I would look at the filtration organs, but I would need a whole medical history and probably a whole symptom list to get a good picture of that. But I would look at like liver function.
Liver function. Well, you guys, we could keep talking about this for a long time, and I know, Keely, you have to run. So, just briefly touch on this. Edward Arnold says, and you probably hear this all the time, Eric, does bleach kill mold?
No, it doesn't.
Thank you. Thank you for clearing that up. Okay, so on that note, what can people do if they think they have mold in their home? What do you think, Eric?
If the mold is a toxic mold, such as Stachybotrys, removal is the only option.
And you don't know if you have Stachybotrys until you get it tested.
No, you don't.
Right. Okay, Keely, how can people find you?
People can find my mold outreach work that I do with Eric Johnson and also independently at my Facebook page called Exposing Mold. And if there's anyone who wants to work as a consulting for health symptoms, that can be scheduled on my website, which is healbetternow.com.
I love that. Eric, what about you? How can people find you and hear more about your story?
Basically, people can just Google up Eric and chronic fatigue syndrome or Eric and mold, and I will come up.
Well, thank you guys both for being here. And Eric, thank you for your service. I say that, and it feels kind of shallow. It doesn't seem like thank you is enough because there are so many experimentations gone wrong on our military. And we just know that there are so many of us who appreciate what you have done, the sacrifices that you have made, more than you know.
Well, thank you very much.
All right, guys, I'll be coming at you again live this week. Thank you so much for joining us. Please share this. My website is ShemaneNugent.rocks, and I do have a free mold checklist. I get so many inquiries that I decided to write a book and produce a documentary on toxic mold and how to recover and remediate that. So that's coming soon, but I've got a free checklist if you want to go to ShemaneNugent.rocks. All right, guys, have a great day. Make it a great day. Do something healthy and happy for you today, because that's going to boost your immune system, won't it, Eric?
Absolutely. Fresh air.
That's right, fresh air, and do something that sets your soul on fire. All right, guys, have a great day. I'll talk to you soon. Bye.
Bye.